ahead and move it back to the East Coast for a second. We nicely were just hearing from Professor Cray about some of the similarities for the dynamics that we're seeing right now, and the dynamics we've seen in the recurrent fights that we've had regarding hitting the debt ceiling, including 2011. So you wrote this morning about the fact that things are actually very different in a whole variety of ways. And I would say, actually, Professor Kelton, your work has helped to shift those dynamics. So I wonder if you could each speak to the differences that complement the similarities or just something else.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it really is striking, like superficially, some similarities between 2023 and 2011, or 2011. And this idea is like, oh, it's going to come down to the last second. And if you read like Wall Street research reports, something that's going to happen, like, oh, it's going to be brinkmanship, and then they always hike the debt ceiling at the last second. Maybe there'll be a little market volatility. And I don't think that's like necessarily like a terrible guess as to how it's going to happen. That strikes me as like very plausible. But the interesting thing to me in 2023 is how different it is like, okay, when the Tea Party had their big victory in 2010, and I think like the mainstream was like always like pretty like skeptical of the Tea Party, et cetera. That being said, there was a climate of like, yeah, but they do kind of have a point. It really is too high. We really do have to like rein in our spending. It really is scary. By 2011, somewhere in 2011, Greece, was already like a year and a half into the crisis, which started in late 2009 for them. There was the Reinhardt-Rogoff 90% debt to GDP. That was very popular before that statistic was basically debunked. There was Simpson-Bowles, which Obama unilaterally set up that commission about reforming entitlements. There was the pay freeze. Obama unilaterally froze federal pay for 2 years, basically citing, we need to get the deficit under control. It just is gone. And again, as you mentioned, I think Stephanie's work and others are part of the reason for that. But, there are still people who are concerned about spending and long-term spending, et cetera, and whatever, that's fine. But the climate is just like so changed in terms of 12 years, in terms of this political salience of spending. This most recent election was not about spending, which is weird because we are in a period of high inflation. And so you think, okay, wait, shouldn't now be the time we have like an actual conversation about spending or not? And so my guess is well, maybe it's not going to play out like 2011. Maybe we'll go over the debt ceiling. Maybe it'll get resolved next week. But the environment is very different from 2011. And so just thinking about how this plays out, I would not be so sure that that's the playbook to look at.
Yeah, I remember those fights, right? The fiscal cliff drama and the way that unfolded. And for those who don't, when Barack Obama was president and we were in a similar sort of place with respect to fights over the raising debt ceiling limit and so forth, and there was this bipartisan deficit reduction commission, Alan Simpson, Erskine Bowles, the Simpson-Bowles Commission, and recommendations were made. This is how we should bring about, I think it was $2.4 trillion in deficit reduction. Here's our proposal. They needed a certain number of members of the commission to vote for it so that it could fast track and move forward. They came up short, I think, 2 votes. And so we didn't get that, but what we did end up with was the sequester, which was, Democrats and Republicans basically saying, if we don't come together with some sort of agreement around deficit reduction, we're just going to hold hands, Thelma and Louise style, go over this fiscal cliff, and then a series of across-the-board cuts to spending will automatically take place, discretionary and non-discretionary. So the thinking was this would so hurt everyone because it would hit defense spending and non-defense discretionary. They would do anything to avoid this. Well, it turns out they didn't. And we went over the cliff and the cuts went into effect. And this is part of the reason that, the recovery from the financial crisis was so underwhelming, anemic, is because, we got austerity in the form of, these spending cuts that just fed on themselves year after year until finally the Trump administration came in. It was like, we're lifting, we're going back to spending money again. So, I'm going to confess something rather strange, which is that on the drive-in this morning, I reread a book that I remember hearing as a child, which was the Brer Rabbit story. And I sort of had it in my head for maybe I would write something hearkening back to this. Brer Rabbit, right? He says, "Don't throw me in the briar patch." Does anybody remember this? don't throw me in the briar patch, don't throw me in the briar patch. Brer Rabbit gets himself in a bit of trouble and the fox gets a hold of him and the rabbit tells the fox, you know, just do anything but whatever you do, don't throw me in the briar patch. There's briar patch where he wanted to be. So the fox throws the rabbit into the briar patch, and that's precisely how it tricked him, right? This is the way I'm sort of thinking about how things could play out with Democrats and Republicans in this, you know, high stakes game of chicken that Rowan was just describing, where you don't actually know how committed Democrats are to avoiding, you know, certain outcomes with respect to, you know, spending cuts and so forth. Like, I don't know that I'm as confident that they would hold the line and say, we're not gonna, you know, you see what I'm saying?
If I could, I just want to add one point to the game of chicken analogy that I think is important. You know, like there is this debt ceiling, it does look like a game of chicken. Interestingly, the only entity that's really expressing alarm about the possibility of not raising the debt ceiling is the White House. And so only the White House is actually claiming to be in a game of chicken. You know, you have others that's, you know, on the side that doesn't want to raise the debt ceiling, on the House Republicans who are reluctant to. They're not saying, oh, we're going to cause disaster. They're like, oh, some payment prioritization, or it wouldn't be that bad. And I'm even like open to the idea, like I'm kind of skeptical that like maybe like an actual default, like this coupon payment, maybe it wouldn't be the end of the world. Like people usually buy treasuries in case of a market panic and et cetera. The only entity that's really saying like this would be a calamity is the White House, which is why it is interesting that also the White House is saying there's no other option. So it's like if you're, and so I think like to Rowan's point, like if it's a choice between like falling over a cliff and pressing a funny button, you would hope that like that's a really obvious choice. Interestingly, like the only entity that's saying like we're facing a cliff, which would end in a disaster, a car, the entire economy going over and going into flames, is also the entity that says there's no other options here. It's a little bit odd.
It is strange. Like so the Treasury Secretary has said, I think her word was cataclysmic or catastrophic, whatever it is, right? There is the recognition, at least in her mind, that for global financial markets, such a move would have extremely serious, you know, consequences. So that they are not making it clear from the outset, under no circumstances will we let it get to that point. We'll do what is the whatever it takes, just a little jog here, right?
Yeah.
You know, we'll do whatever it takes.